Appreciate that. Uh, Typically, I introduce so what I'm looking for here, not celebrities, but dignitaries. So I should say, point to at least a couple of people. Kevin McDonald, council member, thank you for being here. Christina Paul, I guess you're the general plan coordinator for Petaluma Planning. Is that a close enough description?
Yeah, you can say project manager, coordinator, any of those things.
Okay, okay. Let me take a quick look at the second screen, make sure I'm not ignoring somebody. Oh, Dennis Posake, good. Council member elect has just joined in. So good group this evening. Glad to see you all. Glad to have all of you here.
Couple commissioners in here as well, Dave.
I'm probably looking right past him, but tell me who I'm missing, Kevin.
Well, we got Roger Leventhal there. So wave your hand, Roger. And and you're on two different committee commissions as a liaison, right?
No, I'm just I got termed out of parks, so just bike ped.
There we go.
And we have Hollywood Squares right below you.
And we have John Shribs.
That's me up here.
Great. Yep, that's right.
And we have Marge Tar.
I did see Marge earlier. Now I know I've lost her, but okay. Yep, good.
And am I missing anyone?
Yeah, it's a good group. Glad to have all of you here. You all know why we're here, which is to see if we can put together a plan to engage in study that makes us more effective advocates for the issues we care about in the upcoming general plan. I want to talk a little about how we will be doing that, but I first want to address a question that came up this afternoon. Why do we have a general plan at all? Why don't we just make a few edits to the old one rather than seemingly starting from scratch? What's the mandate for us to have a general plan, etc.? I asked Christina Paul to address that this evening. Christina, the floor is yours. I will just say one thing. I want this evening to be very casual. If people have questions as we go along, what I'd like you to do is write something in the chat box. I will look for a good time to interrupt Ms. Paul and get your questions answered as we go. So, Christina, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. So for those of you who haven't seen my general plan presentation once or 5 times, they are available on the city's website under meeting records, and we can point one out if you do want to see that. But in brief, the city is required, like every other city in California, to have a general plan. The general plan is the legal basis for all land use decisions that the city makes, and serves as something like a constitution for the city, or the holding place for the long-term vision for the city. That includes the vision for transportation, for land use development of all kinds, for parks and open space, and so on. And many of our policies and actions as a city are required to be consistent with the general plan. So it's an important document. There is no particular timeline that the city has to update the general plan, but cities do tend to update them on average about every 15 years, which is the time frame that we'll be hitting when we adopt our new general plan in 2023. That time frame is tied to the statutory obligation that we have to update the housing element, which is a chapter of our general plan. That is required to be updated in 2023, and housing is a super important subject when you're thinking about land use. You can't really take housing out of the city, and this housing element is going to be different. It's going to be a higher impact than past elements have been. So we really, as a community and city, decided that it was a good idea to update the whole general plan on that time frame, so that we can have a conversation about all of the topics that are going to come up that housing relates to, as well as climate and all of these other topics. And so Dave has put together an initial list of those topics, which is fantastic. Am I missing anything? In terms of our time frame, we're going to be selecting general plan consultants in the new year. They're going to help facilitate the process for us, and so they'll be a part of this, a part of this series, hopefully. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I don't see any questions in the queue. Don't see any hands raised yet.
Chris is raising her hand.
Oh, it's okay. Very good. Go ahead, Chris. And I see John Shribs is up behind you.
Hey, so thanks for doing this. Excuse me, I'm eating my dinner while this is happening. It truly is casual. So I'm totally new to this process. I would love to read a so-called good general plan from like other, cities similar to us that have been successfully implemented, so I can have something to like get myself grounded in and compare to as we go through the process. Do you have any recommendations, Christina, or would that come from the consultants?
I don't have any that are top of mind for me right now, but I will think about that and give some examples. I know that several have just been updated. Sausalito has just put out a draft. Interestingly, a lot of the new, a lot of the new plans that are just coming out don't include the housing element, and so they're going to have to be pretty significantly updated to include that housing element update, which all the cities in the Bay Area are going to have to go through, and on the same time frame as Petaluma. And another piece of the question that I realized I didn't answer is why do we have to update the whole general plan? So I do want to say first that we're not going to be throwing out the old general plan. There are a lot of good ideas in that, and we're going to be continuing them. One example that springs to mind is that it's pretty progressive, forward thinking in terms of mobility and thinking about pedestrians and bicyclists and that kind of thing. But there are a lot of themes that really aren't in there, like public health. That ties into the age-friendly effort. Affordable housing and the housing crisis were less of an issue. There was no smart station in town when the last general plan was written. So there are a lot of themes that, either physical factors that have changed or themes that are more important now that we want to make sure that we address comprehensively.
John Shribs has a question that sort of builds off that. What are the changes that will be most important?
Well, that's a good question, and also not up to me. So we did a presentation to City Council on October 19th and have a staff report and a draft general plan RFP in that, in the records for that meeting. So if you want to read about this at length, like as in, 35 to 40 pages of detail, you are invited to go and review those documents. But is also, importantly, very much up to the community in terms of what we address. There's a summary in there of what we've heard from the community. There, again, are lots of changes that we're going to need to look at, thinking about climate change, about housing and affordable housing, thinking about, the future of the river, open space, what is our transportation future? These are all questions that we're going to be thinking about and addressing together.
Jerry offers a couple of book references, the general plan in California and the guide to California planning. He provides the name of the publisher in the chat for those who want to look that up. Let me see. Bev Alexander, what are the teeth in the general plan? It looks like some elements of the previous one were ignored.
So there are some pieces of the general plan that were not implemented because essentially there was a great recession, and that really impacted what the city was able to do. So, for example, there are some clauses in the general plan around the staffing level of police and fire, and that's not happening right now simply because the city didn't have that funding. We do really want to work on making sure that there's a strong implementation segment of this general plan, and that we have methodologies in place to kind of check fairly regularly on how our progress is going and whether or not we need to update it. Any requirements that are in the general plan for particular changes, like land use requirements, those are adhered to because we're legally required to adhere to them. But some things like staffing levels, that is a goal for the city. So there are a lot of goals in the general plan that the city is working towards, and it may be that priorities change or that it's simply not possible. So we're going to try to have a really realistic and implementable document.
Okay. Teddy Herzog asks, since housing drives the general plan process to a great extent, what happens if we consciously decide not to keep up with the RHNA RENA goals? And perhaps you want to start by explaining RENA for the few people who might not have heard of it.
Sure. And Councilmember McDonald, jump in anytime. Anybody else is welcome. I don't want to take over this meeting either. So we are legally required to, under RENA, plan for the development, or we are required to essentially identify sites where housing development could happen. And I don't know how far back to go. Okay, RENA is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation process. This is a statewide process where the state identifies how many units, affordable units specifically, need to get built statewide. They chunk that out into region-wide numbers, and they further break that down, or actually the regions. And Petaluma has, Sonoma County has a representative on the group that does this. Chunk that out, or figure out a methodology to figure out how many units go to different cities and counties. So following that process, we are required by state statute to update our housing element so that we identify sites where an adequate, where our assignment essentially could potentially be built. Of course, the city is generally not the developer. We may assist in the development of particular housing projects, but we are not responsible for developing those projects. The state does have some sticks that they use to encourage cities to actually do that development. For example, SB 35, statewide count, anyway, SB 35 came out of the state in 2017, SB 330, AB 2162, all of these bills, all of these pieces of legislation essentially say that developers are allowed to come into town and say, as long as they are in compliance with zoning, as long as they're in compliance with the housing element, they get expedited permit processing, and they also don't have to go through the discretionary review process. They don't have to go through planning commission. So this is one example of the way that the state really encourages us to comply if we have already built all of our RENA allocated units. We do not have to allow expedited processing. Also, the state has really changed the requirements for housing elements this time around. And if we continue to identify sites that essentially never get built, we are required to identify new sites, or to allow the sites that we identified last time around to be developed, again, with ministerial review only, no discretionary process, and also at a minimum density of 20 housing units to the acre, which is like townhomes. So those are the things that happen if we ignore this process. Also, if we really ignore the process, the state says, we're going to help take over the governance of this city. Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you very much. I do want to do one commercial that Know Before You Grow is considering an affordable housing forum like this to talk about where the money comes from for affordable housing. How each of the projects finds its funding and doesn't. And then you mentioned carrots. I'd be interested in knowing if there were any. You mentioned sticks. I was wondering if there are any carrots out there. And then it was considered, well, what if we choose not to do something with it? And the question is equally valid. What if we choose to focus on? So all these things are conversational through the general plan process. And then if you could touch on that piece you mentioned about land we previously designated as buildable that doesn't get built, and what happens? Do we get to say maybe next time it will get built on? There's a couple of questions there. The carrot question, and also the land use question.
So the carrot question, the state doesn't have that many carrots. They are, however, giving us $300,000 we have a grant for $300,000 to do our housing element. So that is an incentive for us to comply, and also to identify sites and really do a fair amount of environmental review on those sites to make it more feasible for affordable housing to get developed on identified sites in this cycle. So again, actually I did a presentation to Know Before You Grow, a month or two ago. So we can also share that. And I'm not going to open my PowerPoint with the maps about, about which sites are which and that kind of thing. But essentially Petaluma identified, gosh, I don't know, 50 or so sites in the last housing element. We cannot reuse any of those sites without allowing them to be developed with ministerial review only, and in some cases also upzoning them to a minimum of 20 units to the acre. So that's for very low and low affordable units only. So we could re-identify those sites for median income or above moderate income, but not for the low and very low. We essentially need to prove the feasibility of particular projects, and the state says, if it hasn't developed in the last 8 years, then maybe it's not feasible. You need to make it more feasible by allowing it to develop with ministerial review. And we can get really great projects that way. It's just sort of preferable in some cases, particularly really central sites that the community has some say in how those sites develop. I feel like there was another part of the question and I need reminding.
Kevin, do you want to?
I think you've captured it, and I think we should move to the next question.
Okay. Roger Leventhal doing his best Donald Rumsfeld imitation here. How does a plan deal with the known unknowns, like changes in commute patterns due to working at home and possible loss or downgrading of the SMART train for commuting?
We get some really smart consultants to come help think about it with us, is one of the ways that we do that. We rely on the community as experts on the community. We will rely on this group as experts in various fields, as well as the dynamics in Petaluma. And then we also get folks in who have as good a vantage point as possible on these bigger trends. And then we do our best. So this is future planning, long range planning. And so, again, one of the reasons that we want to have some methodology for checking on whether or not we're doing well is because none of us are seeing into the future.
Okay. Tanya Parnak, are there any ideal general plans out there for cities our size that have huge parks like San Francisco or New York City?
Are there general plans out there?
Ideal general plans, I think is her question. Yeah.
I don't know. San Francisco has a general plan. Other cities like New York City and other cities across the country have what's called comprehensive plans. So we can post some examples to the city website. Here's my plug for the website. It's at planpetaluma.org. There is a lot of information about the general plan there. We've posted a few presentations, the ones that we gave to City Council. Please go and sign up for the mailing list so that you know when different things are happening. And also importantly, we have a food for thought section where we're posting examples, we're posting articles. You're invited to submit articles that you think we should share with the community. And you can also just give us general comment and do the survey. It's open for another couple of weeks.
That's right. Good. Bill Wolpert, what about requiring our zoning code to align with the general plan?
The zoning code will get updated so that it aligns with the general plan after the general plan is complete.
Now, I'll jump in with my own question there. Last time we began that process of updating the zoning code and then got derailed by the Great Recession. I know those things happen, but do we have any way of avoiding that kind of result in the future?
It's certainly something that the city is planning on doing. It's in the schedule for the general plan to happen right away afterwards. That's all I've got.
Okay. Bev Alexander says she had follow-on questions, which I'd sort of understood. Bev, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Sure. Okay, thank you. For one thing, this wasn't exactly my question, but Tanya had asked about not San Francisco, but cities the size of Petaluma, whether any of them might have had a general plan, including a large park. But my question is, what happens if you have a conflict between CEQA and RENA? So you're supposed to build X amount of housing, but you live in a city that floods and has wetlands, you know, and yeah, I think, you know, how do those things get sorted out? And the other part, the follow-up question part was in terms of having teeth in the general plan, the things that I was thinking of were bike paths and the river trail, both of which were not realized in this current time period. And I was wondering, like I said, what makes this have to happen? Is it just optional or what?
So one question at a time, otherwise I do forget in the middle. Sorry, I should write it down. I apologize. I will do that for the next one. Oh gosh. Okay. In terms of a general plan that relates to a city like the size of Petaluma, again, we can look for examples. In terms of teeth for the general plan, some of these things, again, it's a vision, and if the city doesn't have the funding or the community decides to reprioritize, then those things won't happen, which is a good reason to check again, you know, every 5 years or so about whether or not we're still on track with the general plan or if we want to do any reprioritization.
Why didn't the river trail come to fruition? I mean, I've seen little pieces of it, but I don't see the grand thing.
Well, part of the reason for that, you know, I'm not an expert on that project in particular, but part of the reason for that is that a lot of that land is private. And so, you know, you're relying on private landowners to develop that, or for projects to redevelop those sites and provide that trail. But I know that, you know, in the cases where those sites have redeveloped, then that's a major priority for the city.
And then with CEQA and RENA?
With CEQA and RENA, we are required to adopt a housing element that, you know, provides sites for RENA, for the development of the allocation that we get under RENA. Our goal as a city, you know, speaking broadly, and of course this is going to take a couple of years to develop, is to develop a, you know, essentially the direction we've gotten from the community and from decision makers is that we're going to be looking a lot at infill, which has lower, you know, lower impacts. That means we're going to be developing within the urban growth boundary generally, you know, and if there's any talk of expansion, that's going to be a significant conversation, and working to do transit-oriented development and so on, and working on having a self-mitigating plan. So we'll have transit-oriented development, we'll have transportation demand management, and all these kinds of things. But, you know, CEQA is not going to stop us from developing a housing element that complies with state statute.
Really? Wow.
Okay. For those who are looking at the list of chat comments, Jerry has put up another couple of links. I guess one's MTC regarding Plan Bay Area 2050. The other is ABAG on regional housing needs. And he also references an upcoming solution summit for the housing crisis. So please take a look at those if that is your area of interest. John Shribs, talk about the process, having a citizen committee, steps of getting involved. The Rainier Crossing seems a huge piece of future development and impact. Will this be up for debate at various levels? There were two questions there, I think.
I'm going to go backwards. So Rainier will certainly be a topic of conversation. The general plan advisory, and maybe, you know, Councilmember McDonald might have more insight into Rainier, or, you know, or Committee Member Leventhal. On the, oh God, I'm so sorry. I've had a really long day.
GPAC was the other question,
GPAC,
how that
thank you.
process will work.
So the General Plan Advisory Committee is open for applications. It's going to be a committee of up to 15 people. There is an application that is live now on the General Plan website, planpetaluma.org. There's a big button on the very top of it where you can access that application. We are publicizing that widely. Everybody's going to get a notice in their utility bill that they're going to be able to apply for that. And the application due date is December 7th. The General Plan Advisory Committee is going to be a group of community members that is as representative as possible and as determined by council of the Petaluma community. We're going to want folks from various neighborhoods in town with various interests. Commissioners and committee members are more than welcome to apply to be on the GPAC. It's going to be a fair amount of work. It's going to be meeting about every month or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on what's happening with the general plan, as well as, reviewing preliminary plan documents. It's going to be a body that works fairly closely with the consultants, providing guidance, providing input, and providing expertise and community insight. It's not ultimately going to be a decision-making body. The decisions are left to council, so it's an advisory committee that is providing feedback. But it is a very important role. It's going to be a key piece of the general plan process.
I think Kevin has a question or a
There,
comment.
one of each probably. So the only element I'd like to add to Christina's comment on the GPAC is that we have also heard comment that diversity of the citizenry is going to be a consideration as well. And then to Christina, I'd like to ask the Rainier question differently. I'd like to say, do elements of the old plan automatically transfer through and continue and be part, or must each element of the new plan stand on its own? Will there be a new traffic study for instance, would there be a new traffic study for Rainier and other supporting elements?
So I think that we're going to be looking at each element. For Rainier specifically, it has a current EIR, so we wouldn't necessarily have to update that, although it is getting a little bit aged, is my understanding. So we wouldn't necessarily have to redo Rainier's EIR, and all environmental documentation for the new general plan would build off of whatever we have currently, so that we're not duplicating work.
And no element carries automatically through.
That's right.
Terry Shore, how will the general plan process address the need to renew the voter-approved urban growth boundary?
So the urban growth boundary, as you all know, is set to expire in 2025. Our expectation is that will be a topic of conversation as part of the general plan process. We got some direction from council in the last meeting that we should definitely include it as part of our conversation and likely bring it back to voters before 2025. So that if there are any shifts in the urban growth boundary that are proposed by the community or adopted by decision makers, that is put to the voters.
Okay. Ben Peters, John Shribs notes that there's a nice documentary at the library regarding Helen Putnam, former mayor, and how she influenced changes in city development. And then Ben Peters asks, what is the status of the county general plan? Is that being updated as well? Describe the important linkages to be aware of.
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody else know what's going on with the county general plan?
Actually, I've just seen a notice in the last couple of days, they are just beginning the process. It's like they're 2 months behind the city. So almost in tandem.
Dave, this is Terry Shore. No, the county of Sonoma is not updating its general plan right now. It's just started on a strategic plan, which is not the same as the general plan at all.
I misread.
And it's been back burner for quite a while. I'm with Greenbelt Alliance. We've been pushing the county to do an update of the general plan. But it's still on the back burner for now.
Okay. Jerry asked, can a general plan anticipate the use of eminent domain for river path development?
Could it anticipate that? You know, potentially. That's not something that's come up in our conversations. Eminent domain is the third rail that I'm gonna leave to other people to bring up.
Okay. Back to Roger Leventhal. The city isn't the developer, so trails, whoops, I just moved myself. City isn't the developer, so trails get built as projects come forward. Maybe Measure M can help a little bit. Then he talks about Jerry Brown getting rid of local redevelopment. Actually, apparently it wasn't a question here. He was just filling in the blanks, which is appreciated. But David Powers, should the IZO realignment happen contemporaneously with the general plan update?
No. we will be, you know, it's sort of an open question about whether or not the consultants that we bring on to do the general plan would also do the zoning code. We will be thinking about what the zoning code will look like as we're writing the general plan, certainly. But you kind of can't write the code until you know what's in the general plan.
Okay. Ben Peters, I know the local coastal plan is being finalized. Is there any influence with that?
The local coastal plan?
Yeah.
I don't think we have any local coastal areas in Petaluma.
Okay. And then Kevin McDonald, will a new flood plan be done as part of the general plan?
Excellent question. So yes, the answer is that the city engineer is working on thinking about how to update our floodplain mapping so that we have newer data and a newer agreement with FEMA on where our floodplain maps go, you know, where the lines are. And that will be a major consideration in the general plan.
Very good. And we have finally reached the end of our questions. That was a excellent effort. I appreciate that. Christina, I apologize. I had no idea we'd be grilling you that much, but you seem good-natured about it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And Dan, if it's possible to capture the chat before the evening is over, I think there's some good things in there, some links that Jerry provided, etc. If you know how to do that, that would be much appreciated.
I think that I can do that, and I think that we'll be able to push that to the comments, the YouTube. I have one question that's been asked to be asked anonymously, and that question is there a critical section? Specifically housing, climate, transportation. Is it possible to call out one of those and say that's the thing?
Well, no. Sorry. It's a good question. So there are really significant themes, as I mentioned, that are top of mind for everybody, including climate, including housing, including transportation. But it's the role of the general plan to really treat these pieces, you know, as a web that is interconnected. I think that we would be ill-served in not looking at it as a comprehensive system. At least that's my system dynamics self-talking. You know, there may be something that emerges with more emphasis, but we do still really want to make sure that we serve each of the elements of the general plan comprehensively. And also we're required to be internally consistent. So we have to make sure that, for example, we don't put a factory out somewhere where there's no road, you know, as an example.
As we were talking, I think at least 3 more good questions came in here. Bill Wolpert, how far out will the flood plan go?
Okay, so flood plan versus flood plain. So we will again, be working on on developing updated floodplain modeling and looking at sea level rise. There's not going to be a specific plan that's the flood plan. How we address the floodplain will be a part of the general plan. How close do we want to allow development to go? What are the requirements for development that may be in the floodplain? Are we not going to allow development in the floodplain if it's a previously undeveloped site? What if it is a previously developed site? We actually have quite a few areas of town that are in the floodplain that are, developed, that completely urbanized. So do we want to not allow development there? I think these are points that are going to come up, and we don't have answers to them yet. But we're going to be looking at that in a fair amount of detail. Does that answer the question?
Bill, not if that was a good enough answer.
No, how far out though? I mean, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Does it cover us to the end of the general plan?
Our mapping?
The floodplain mapping?
That's a good question. I mean, floodplain mapping and thinking about sea level rise is something that is evolving. They're like what the best practice is kind of a moving target. And so there again, that's something that we would want to have some capacity to update.
But it is, in the past, we've relied on FEMA historical mapping, and now we're finding that historical mapping isn't adequate to chart development patterns for the future. So we have to anticipate some kind of future plan, and considering that buildings or development lasts for decades, 50 years or more, I mean, it seems like our mapping should go out at least that far.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of a projection, that makes sense. If we're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at changes. We're looking at like what's the I mean, the intention of having 100-year floodplain is that you're accounting for 100 years of variation. Whether or not we want to account for how the model gets updated is something that we should all talk about. And the intention would be that, yes, we would be accommodating for a long range of development. It's not just going to be a 5-year model.
Yeah, but again, the 100-year plan is based on historical data, and I just don't think that data is accurate anymore.
Right, so that's why we're working on a new model.
Okay.
Natasha asks, how does the climate action plan inform the general plan? It appears that Sacramento wrote the two of them together.
Sorry, I got distracted by Councilmember McDonald's question.
Oh, was he asking a question? I'm sorry, Kevin, did I cut you off?
No, it was in the chat.
Oh, I didn't even see it. Okay.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, Dave?
This is from Natasha. How does the climate action plan inform the general plan? It appears that Sacramento wrote them together.
Right. Okay. So right now, what we're doing is we're working with the planning, is working with the Climate Action Committee, and in fact, other staff as well, to help them think through the Climate Action Emergency Framework and establish what really is a framework, a general direction for climate action that will significantly inform the general plan and what topics we're going to be talking about. Our expectation is that we'll be essentially doing a climate action plan. It may be integrated into the general plan itself, but we'll have a similar level of policy making as a climate action plan as part of this plan. There may be some additional implementation that we want to detail after the general plan gets written that's around climate implementation. But again, we're going to have a fair amount of that in the general plan itself. There's a certain level of detail that we can't get to. Like we can't do a parks master plan and a bikes and ped master plan and all of these things as part of the general plan. We kind of need to establish the high level priorities and set the direction and then go. So that's what our plan is.
Okay. Bev Alexander, if the city council makes a decision, upon whom do they rely? The GPAC or city staff?
So City Council Member McDonald, would you like to respond to that question?
Well, the obvious is and that it relies on all input, and professional input is part of it, and emotional input and local knowledge is another input. So the political answer is you listen to everything and make the best decision you can.
But doesn't the staff have more access than the GPAC, or is there no particular thing?
Well, I mean, Christina's probably going to weigh in on this one, but I would say that the GPAC and the staff are a collaborative body, and that the GPAC is getting a lot of its information from staff and from the consultant experts that are brought, and sort of the GPAC's job to challenge a little of that and to bring local knowledge to a little of that, and to set expectations, set community expectation. That is, if we want to be in a place that's further to the right or the left or up or down than some professional norm, then that's the voice of the community that is necessary strength from any individual on the GPAC.
Right, and from a staff perspective, it's our job to provide technical expertise and to provide, fairly objective input. That's why we write our staff reports so dryly, is because we're really just trying to provide information to council members and the community to make decisions.
We have some other material we want to get onto tonight, but there are 3 more questions. I think
Dave, I should have come later.
What? No, this is fine. I'm thrilled that you're good natured about this. And I think these are all really good questions. Do the sections of the general plan go before the council in sections or all at once for approval? That's from Tanya.
That depends on how we decide it's best and what council wants to do.
Okay. Then from Kevin, equity is an element. What do you think that involves?
Yeah, so equity as an element. So, okay, let's break that down a little bit. We are required to do an environmental justice element. That is fairly specifically around looking at what the needs of particular neighborhoods in town are to help shield them from pollution exposure and another kind of exposure like that. It looks at groundwater and income level and that kind of thing. And we do in fact think that we have a neighborhood in town. It's not super populated, but it's around Petaluma Boulevard North, kind of near the mall, where we do in fact qualify to need to prepare that element. In terms of equity, that is an optional element, but something that we certainly think that we'll be looking at. It's something that's a major focus in the initial draft of the Climate Action Committee's Climate Action Emergency Framework. So that, one of the major things that we need to do around that is to make sure that we do a great job reaching out to folks in the community, making sure that we think about what, how to not place undue burden of any particular kind on any particular part of town or any particular community. And that's something that we're all going to be working on together.
Okay. Then Kevin followed up with the question, is sea level rise, change of land use a taking?
That's what got me.
And the answer is?
Is sea level rise, change of land use a taking? So, well, it really depends on how there are lots of different ways we could potentially go with sea level rise. Nobody likes to hear the words managed retreat. That's something there. If you go down to Pacifica, there are a lot of signs that say no managed retreat. It's bad for everyone. So, cities could potentially decide to armor waterways and not lose any land. Zoning is not something that is entitled with a particular property. So rezoning a parcel is not a taking.
That's right.
That's all I have to say on that.
The white Cadillac decision, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think probably the last question we'll take here from Ben Peters, what are the best places to incorporate the state required groundwater basin sustainability plan?
What are the best places to incorporate the state required groundwater basin sustainability plan? So we're going to likely have a sustainability element. The current general plan has a river water element or water element. We could potentially include it there. There are a lot of topics that we could put in a variety of different places in the general plan. But we can certainly find a place to incorporate those concerns.
Okay. And with that, I think we're willing to let Christina get off the hot seat, but I do want to get into a little bit of a conversation regarding where we're going to go with our program. Yeah, absolutely. Much appreciated, Christina. I know that was a bigger role than you'd anticipated, but I think it really helped us this evening. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let me take over here a little bit. Whoops. Let's see. There we go. Well, heck. There we go. Some of you have already seen, well, this is derived from what you saw previously in my emails announcing, or our emails announcing today's program. But I want to go through it in a little more detail. I've done some reorganization of some of the concepts, and this will be the schedule by which we conduct this study program over the next, I'm estimating, 18 months. I want to start by going across the top. What I really would like to start filling in today, I mean, obviously forum date topic, that's obvious, but topic chair. I'm looking to find folks among the people here this evening who are willing to take on one topic, and others of us will help you put it together, but truly take the lead in finding a speaker, arranging material, just take overall the overall chair activities for the particular topic. And then speakers, we can pull in speakers in the Zoom era from a lot of different places. There are speakers I'm already thinking of reaching out to in a different time zone who, because of Zoom, can truly give us some insights we couldn't have gotten in the days when we all had to meet in person. Context, this is something, I don't think Pete Gang is with us here this evening, but it's, as he and I have been discussing, human beings tend to think linearly. And we definitely communicate linearly, one idea after the other. But to truly solve some of the challenges of the next 20 years, we need to think holistically. We can't just talk housing. We have to be thinking about housing in the context of social justice, climate change, etc. So what we want to do is come up with a way to set the context for each of the topics we're discussing, lay it out at the beginning of the evening, and then have the ability to reference back to it. So we try to convert some of our linear conversation into a more holistic conversation. I'm not sure this is the right approach to get there, but it's something we have to do. And then books, videos, articles, that will be putting together a library of materials that nobody can partake completely of, but give people some background information that they can review prior to a meeting, come in. I was going to say well prepared for questions, but based on tonight, we don't need to prepare people for questions. They're doing a great job of it. So that's the kind of content we want to put together. Then looking down at our topics, and once again, I will ask you if you have, actually, I guess when share screen, I've lost my ability to see the chat questions. Dan, if you want to jump in and let me know if there's some chat questions building up, we should respond to, let me know. I can't see them.
Nope. I will keep an eye, but whoever that was is also keeping an eye.
Okay. Sprawl versus compact. Whoops, that was dumb. There we go. Sprawl versus compact development. This is sort of the heart of what Urban Chat has always been about, that compact development is better than sprawl. It's better for the climate. It's better for social justice. It's better for municipal dollars. But the mere fact that it's always been our basis does not mean we just get to assume it. I think we want to spend our first meeting talking about why that is, looking back to some of the principal authors who've written well-regarded works on it. I'm not quite sure who the speaker would be here. Not really my call, but to the extent I've thought about it. But I think we start with that question. Second month is one that was not even on my list until yesterday. And Terry Shore, I apologize for that. But it's something that came up in a Zoom conversation I had with Christina yesterday morning. The preliminary RENA numbers that we've seen, once again, regional housing needs allocation, RENA shows a lot of units allocated to the county rather than to cities. If Sonoma County, in order to meet their RENA allocation, pushes housing around the perimeter of Petaluma, is that really an answer we want? Or do we want to say, hold on, before we let the county do that, we'd rather expand our urban growth boundary and make something that's truly compatible with Petaluma rather than what the county might impose on us? It's a complicated question. I'm hoping that Terry Shore will take a lead on this one, hint, hint. But I think it is such a key question to where we're going. It needs to be month 2. Month 3?
Dave, I would be happy to help with that. And this is Terry. And
Yes,
I
it is.
don't think it's an either or.
I would agree with that. I think it's a complex, multifaceted question. So, and thank you for volunteering. I'll be in touch.
Dave,
Kevin.
Kevin here.
Yeah.
Don't we have to dovetail the processes? Isn't the county fighting their RENA allocation? And couldn't some of that loop back into Petaluma allocation?
I don't know that for a fact, Kevin. I would expect that to be happening. You probably know more than I do. But yeah, we certainly need to be integrating with the county.
I saw Beverly had her hand up, and I see that Jerry says for affordable housing, we can get a guest presenter from Housing California, which seems to me suspiciously close to a volunteering.
Okay. I will be watching this entire recording in tomorrow and making notes on things like that. Jerry, I'll be in touch. And then did you say Bev had her hand up? Did she want to be recognized?
No, that was from before.
Okay.
Okay,
I
Very
just
good.
lowered my hand. Sorry.
Okay.
cool.
Then I am proposing that we deal with housing in over a period of 2 months. The first month would be housing in general, the development process, just the challenges of putting housing development together, combined with the question of, and I don't hear this phrase as much anymore, but I think it's still crucial, achieving a job housing balance. Now, if we can get everybody who works in Petaluma to live in Petaluma, an impossible goal, but still something we should strive for, we cut down commuting, we make transit more effective, we have huge climate impacts. There are things there we have to be addressing over the next 20 years. I would like to have a conversation about them starting now. Then we move on to affordable housing, which is of course the even bigger challenge. Kevin mentioned earlier we may be doing a Know Before You Grow session strictly on the finances of affordable housing. That may be a standalone forum separate from this, but the two of them interrelate. Affordable housing, especially through the RENA process, is so crucial to Petaluma. I think it's something we should be talking about. And then we really effectively continue with housing for a third month in talking about transit-oriented development. There's a number of projects going on in Petaluma now, but there's a lot more we can be doing. But there's also the question of, is the transit system strong enough to handle as much TOD as we would like to add? And our SMART runs out of capacity not that far from now. Petaluma Transit isn't as well funded as we would like. There's a lot of challenges. Christine, if you have any thoughts on this, feel free to jump in, but I think TOD is one of the more complex topics we'll be talking about. Dan, any questions?
Unmute myself. So Ellie and Kevin seem to have volunteered for something on the affordable housing session. And we have John putting in a plug for urban forestry as a topic, a neglected resource that establishes our entire urban ecosystem and has lots of impact on our society, which also sounds like we'd love for you to step up to the plate.
It's not a topic on the list yet, but I think it certainly is appropriate. I think I'll want to check with Christina, if not today, tomorrow, to see how they're going to handle urban forestry in the general plan. But I think it's a very reasonable approach. And if Ally's volunteering on housing, I think I heard maybe Ally and Kevin combined. Ally, you were already on my list of contact. I just wanted to get past tonight. So thank you for being here and thank you for offering.
And I think this is tying back to the previous discussion rather than on the current one, but Roger asked, why is the current city council voting on who is on the committee for the general plan and not the new city council? Why not wait until January to appoint members?
I think they may be heading that direction, but Kevin, can you respond to that?
I think I'll respond on Monday night. Yeah, it's going to get a full review by council, so that's the most appropriate place for this.
Okay, that was a very political answer. Okay, that's six. Okay, that gets us 6 months in. Now we get into a lot of different topics. Historic preservation. Bill has pushed for this to be on the list. Bill has offered to be the topic chair. Much appreciated. Zoning and creating full service neighborhoods. I've combined these two. The full service neighborhood is the concept of we can never reduce car dependence until you can walk to the grocery store and buy a head of broccoli. And right now there are so few places where you can truly do that. And because zoning is a tool to create that or not create it in many cases, I think the two do fit together. I am really intrigued to see who would volunteer to take on this topic, but I think it's one of the more forward-thinking elements that we should be considering. Changing role of retail, the future of office space. That's, there's always been concerns about retail. The amount of open space, empty space we have around Petaluma is a concern. I just saw some numbers today that the US as a whole has about 5 times as many square feet of retail space per resident as Japan and Britain, I believe. So, I mean, we have been effectively over retailed compared to the world forever. COVID has only made it worse. What happens to those spaces when they become unsustainable? And office space then is a COVID issue. Do we ever go back full time to offices? Does it leave office space open? Is it reasonable to look at converting office space into residential? I'm not sure it does, but what happens to an office building that is suddenly empty? Do we just tear it down or can we find alternative uses? Having dealt with a lot of those land issues, I then have proposed that we move over into the transportation side, starting with the question of integration, which is cars, buses, bikes, and PEDs are not independent, but they interrelate. As transit enthusiasts are always fond of saying, every transit trip begins and ends with a walk or a bike ride. So I want to talk about that, then combined with the state of our local transit, SMART, Petaluma Transit, Golden Gate, and Sonoma County. Traffic, hopefully the long-term goal of the general plan of this group, et cetera, will be to reduce traffic. Nonetheless, it is still an ongoing issue. Cars are not going away tomorrow. So how we manage traffic effectively is something worth conversation. Biking, walking, and then parking, the other side of driving. I know the city has made motions towards switching away from the parking minimum standard to the parking maximum. I think we could also be talking about parking meters. I mean, parking is such a fascinating subject. I'm sure we'll have no problem spending a full evening on that. Adjusting to a changing climate. I keep bringing this one up, and it's one that fascinates me. And I think we've heard a little bit of reference to it earlier this evening. If we have a piece of land that is a marvelously appropriate site for development today, close to downtown, climate friendly, walkable, next to transit, but we know it'll be underwater in 50 years. What do we do with it? Do we develop it and just let the building go away at some point? Do we build it and try to armor to protect it as long as possible? Do we say we walk away from it? I really have no idea, but we will have projects come in front of the city in the next few years where that's a very real question. If we don't have an answer in mind, we're just going to make, you know, one-off decisions. That is not the way to build a city. And finishing up with a couple of issues here, and if we want to include urban forestry, this is where it should go. Well, standalone monthly meeting in here, but parks and open space, age friendly. Chris Rebelo has already offered to chair that one.
Below.
Did I hear a question there? Oh, I thought I heard a voice.
It was a pronunciation correction, and it was Rebelo, not Rebelo.
Was that Chris saying, seriously?
I believe so.
I've been saying that wrong for 3 years, Chris. You should have corrected me before this.
No, it's Rebelo. That wasn't, I hadn't chimed in. You did it right. It's Rebelo. You got it.
Oh, I did get it right. Okay.
It was somebody else. I'm sorry, I missed who else it was.
Okay. So it is Rebelo. Thank you. And then the last topic up here for now is fairgrounds. This list is still fluid. One thing that Christina has asked that we do is retain some flexibility, because when the city brings on a general plan consultant, she would like us to be coordinating with that general plan consultant who may have other topics they would like to bring to this group for education, advocacy, et cetera. So this is a work in progress. Feel free to offer comments, thoughts, questions, et cetera.
So just running down the list in the chat session here, Anne says she'd be happy to volunteer to chair climate friendly development and suggests it come earlier because it touches many other things.
Yes,
Kevin,
it does. I agree. Okay.
Kevin says we need a discussion on preservation of industrial space, which I think is an interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm not, Kevin, I'm not, we may need to talk about the sitting, but I am intrigued by what you mean by that. And we can talk tomorrow if that's more convenient for you.
It's certainly batting around interestingly in my head. And I think that might have something to do with kind of maintaining manufacturing clusters in terms of future economic growth, but I'm not sure.
Okay, well, he's unmuted himself, so I think he wants to jump in and explain himself.
There we go. Yeah, it's just that no element of the life within a city should be ignored in a plan, or it gets assumed it's not a valuable part. And for all those automotive spaces and all the other spaces that are not the best neighbors and who don't, with housing being such a high priority right now, it's entirely possible that housing gobbles up like Pac-Man every other zoning use. So identification that a complete city has to have all services. Much as we talk about parks, the industrial spaces, that type of employment needs to be respected in this.
Doesn't that fall under zoning?
Equally to all other tasks, I just want to make sure that it is noted as a distinct trade.
Okay, thank you.
And then we've had a little bit of a discussion in the chat about the differences and similarities between walking and biking. And from that, it seems as though we might have gotten, Teddy says, maybe better for me to topic chair walking, since I'm a very big walker in Petaluma and pedestrian oriented is at the heart of how I think. Walking is not biking. So.
Yeah, to me, walking and biking are quite distinct in terms of how they function in a community. I think they're both very important, but I would hate to combine them together. I'm glad Teddy's offering to take on the walking task. Thank you.
John asks, is there a way to make developers and builders required to take responsibility for future situations such as flooding? Which I think is a callback to the earlier discussion on the general plan rather than the topics that we're laying out now.
It is, and I think I've got my thoughts on that, but if Christina's still here and wants to weigh in, she'd probably be a better voice.
I'm here, but Dave, you go ahead and I'll add.
Howard? No, I mean, I think the problem with looking for developers to take that responsibility is in many cases, they're looking to sell the homes, the whatever, and they're no longer associated with the community. And if you were to tell them that, hey, you can sell the homes all you want, but if it floods in 20 years, you're still responsible. You're not going to get any development. Kevin, I see your hands up.
And then one other story on this, the whole owned condominium market collapsed when we made condos builders responsible for 10 years in the future. And so it shifted us from home ownership and equity and wealth building at a modest buy-in price to a renter nation shipping their money out of community. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about here.
That's a really good point. Thank you for making that. Christina, anything to add to that?
Yes, my one addition is that, what we can do is we can require that there be no stormwater, aggregate stormwater offloads for any particular project. So we can require that they retain and treat stormwater on site so that they're not adding to flooding.
And then on Christina's point, right now, any development that comes in has to install a maintenance plan for all the stormwater on their property right now. And the city monitors and holds them accountable for maintaining the stormwater basins or low impact development facilities that are on the development. That's already a thing that's happening.
Correct.
Elizabeth asks, where do we talk about an updated river management plan?
I guess there's two parts to that question. We can certainly add it as another element of our schedule here. But Christina, to what extent will an updated river management plan be part of the general plan?
So I think that we'll have the high level policies in the general plan, kind of like the parks plan or the bike ped plan. It might be something that gets detailed out a bit more after the general plan, but we will have the fundamentals in the general plan.
But will those be new fundamentals you develop as part of the general plan, or will you be coming from existing documents such as the PRAP report?
We'll use existing documents as the foundation and then build off of them and figure out whether or not that's the current desired direction, or we need to tweak a little bit, or
Okay.
best practices.
So there is some good reason to consider those issues because they may be modified in the general plan. So it's reasonable for us to weigh in on what those modifications should be. Okay. Elizabeth,
John,
thank you for bringing that up. You're in charge of it.
John mentions that a watershed enhancement plan is in development by the Resource Conservation District, meeting bi-monthly.
Okay.
And then how does this map up to the general plan timeline?
So right now we do not have a super highly detailed general plan timeline because we're going to be collaborating on that with the general plan consultants. So, we chatted a little bit, Dave and I, about that and about the fact that it would be good to, work on matching this up with the key themes that are coming up in the general plan. So, potentially this first 5 months, we really do schedule out. And then, as we get more into the general plan process, we might move things around a little bit.
Yeah. That's exactly my thought. In order to get the speakers we do need to be scheduling 5 months ahead. So the first 5 months I think are fixed unless I hear some really good arguments this evening. But beyond that, all those are movable, changeable, et cetera, as we work with the consultant.
Yeah, and I do want to say that for folks who are, volunteering to lead these sessions, that's wonderful. And, we could certainly consider having experts from the planning consulting team come and talk and be part of these sessions and bring their expertise as well.
That
So
would be
you
great.
won't be starting from zero.
Anything else there, Dan? You're on mute.
There we go. No, nothing else after that.
Okay, if that's the case, I believe we are done for the evening. Dan will be turning this into a recording that'll be up on YouTube probably tomorrow. I will probably get the link out to everybody on Friday when I give you a little more details regarding next Wednesday's forum on the Meridian at Corona Station project. If anybody has questions that they think of after tonight, feel free to email me, to email Christina, to email anybody. Let's keep the conversation going.
Hey,
And
Dave, I just want to give a shout out to both you and Kevin. I'm like so proud of what Know Before You Grow has turned into. Just huge congrats to both of you. I think it's really great.
Well, thank you, but there are even more people beyond that who are involved. Dan Like has been
I
a
know,
key
but
player, Barry, Sharon, but
the founders.
it's been a fun effort, and the more people we can get helping going forward, the even better we can make it. So,
And the more
thank you.
people we tell, so if you want to put this on your Facebook page or your Nextdoor posting, and talk about how the community is discussing things even outside of city structure, I think that'd be real positive messaging.
Agreed.
yes. And yeah, I will also try to take the chat and put it up on the YouTube comments or somewhere. And that should be the chat that was publicly visible and not necessarily the private messages that went back and forth, if anybody has concerns about that. So we should be good.
Can I volunteer a little tech support, which is anyone who wants to save a chat can click the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat and then slide over to save chat. Although it's just text form, not.
And more people who do that sort of thing, better, because that's, yeah, the backups for me are always good.
Very good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Everyone, thank you for being here. We'll see you
Thank you
next
very
week.
much, everyone. Thanks,
Cool.
Dan. Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you. That was great.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
You.
Thank you all. This was really wonderful.